Welcome to the Red Pill Sports and Entertainment Show. I am your host, Albert Apache, and as usual, we're brought to you by Open Source Self-Defense, Fitness, and Grappling. Okay, guys, so welcome to the show. Life has been getting in the way, so this revamp to getting back to putting out a show at least once a week has been hard. So what I've done is gone to a process of kind of doing segments and then trying to splice them together. So bear with me if the transitions are a little bit rough, but here we go. Okay, guys, so in this segment, I wanted to cover a topic, basically a question that I get asked by brand new people to jiu-jitsu, those that are maybe like a week in, maybe a month in, and they really have the jiu-jitsu bug pretty bad. And as you might be able to tell, that very first question is, how long does it take to earn a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, right? Well, the thing about this question is that there are really two questions hidden within this one question. The first would be essentially to articulate it. Can you give me a number of months or years it will take me to make blue belt? And then the second question in there that they're kind of asking, but they don't want to come out and just ask it is, how do I make blue belt fast, right? How do I get there quickly? So let's consider the first question, how many months or years will it take? Let's cover that one first. So you hear a lot of people answer this and they say, oh, it depends on the individual and this and that. And all of that is true. But I don't think that many people articulate why that's true, okay? And the reason why it's true that it depends on the individual is because on average, it takes somewhere between 5 and 800 mat hours, right? So rather than thinking in terms of dates or, a certain weeks or a certain amount of years, you really have to think about this in terms of how many mat hours it's going to take to become proficient enough to be considered a blue belt. Now, every single school, every single, instructor has their own criteria. For instance, the Gracies are with the Gracie Academy, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is very much the Helio Gracie requirement, which is to be able to defend yourself against an untrained opponent on the street. Some other schools of thought are different. You should have a certain number of techniques. And some people, it goes by feel. Some professors go by feel. Some professors have curriculum. It's all different, okay? Now, the reality, though, is that it still is going to be on average 5 to 800 mat hours. So that's why you get the answer of, well, it depends on the individual, because we have no way to know if you're going to come to class, like let's say you're coming to class every single day, Monday through Friday, right? And you're there at open mat. So you're there at least 6 classes a week. Well, are you going to keep that pace for the entire year? Because most people don't. They usually drop off at about 6 to 8 weeks, and they start dropping off to maybe 4 times or 3 times, a week. And that's if, we're lucky, right? A lot of people, their ego gets them and they start dropping off to 1 time a week, and then they just don't show up. So there you have it. Now, the question that everybody's really asking when they ask, how long will it take, right? It's the question that nobody really wants to come out and ask because they don't want to seem like, goofy, or they don't want to seem like overly belt crazy, okay? And that's, how do I make blue belt as fast as possible? Now, I'm going to give you my thoughts on it. And keep in mind, I'm a purple belt, so in some ways, I feel like I might even be able to answer this question better than a black belt because I'm closer from the transition, from white to blue than a black belt is. and it almost is like one of those things where, like, when you're a kid, sometimes, like a 13-year-old knows how to communicate or, articulate something to a 10-year-old better than maybe an adult does because, they're kind of at their same level. Or sometimes, like, you get peer tutoring, and sometimes, in college, for instance, your peers are your tutors, and sometimes they can teach you a concept better than the instructor. And it doesn't mean the instructor doesn't know the material, it's just that your peer maybe understands what level you're at better. So that's one way to take it. And then the other way to take it is maybe I don't even know what the hell I'm talking about because I'm only a purple belt, right? So whatever. Here's my thoughts on it. So the blue belt fast recipe to me has two major um, components or two major ingredients. The first one is training, and the other one is resources. So, first, let's talk about training. Now, when I'm talking about training, I'm talking about what are you doing during your training and what are you training. So, the very first thing you need to do to make blue belt fast is check your ego at the door. Now, I know you hear this over and over and over, but let me articulate what that means. What that means is if you're athletic, or let's say you've dabbled with judo, or you wrestled in high school, or whatever the case may be, you're an athlete. Let's say you're just a natural born athlete. Um, you don't want to just roll with the people that you can dominate, right? Because, well, I'll just use my superior athleticism, my superior youth, my superior strength, the little bit of understanding that I know. So, yeah, I'm smashing other white belts. I'm a man, right? Or, hey, there's this female purple belt that's all of 115 pounds soaking wet, and I'm a 200-pound guy who, wrestled in high school, and I still lift, and, I have my full man strength. And so I'm just going to sit be a rock solid person where she just can't do anything, unless I open up, right? So you don't want to be that guy. You want to be the guy that goes out and actually, um, you know, is okay with getting smashed by people their own size. Of course, people who are smaller as well, people who have the technique to do it. Those are the people that you want to train with, okay? You want to check your ego at the door, and so you want to get smashed. You do. Like, that's one of the best ways. Once you start sparring, okay, you want to get smashed. Next, be diligent, okay? Be diligent in making it to class and while in class. Okay. I don't know how many times, and how many people I've seen come and go in jujitsu that they come into class, and granted, I've only been training 7 years. Think about this. It's not like I have a ton of experience like a black belt that has 12, 15, 20 years under their belt, right? I've only had 7. So I've already seen a large number of people who come into class, are maybe diligent about coming to class for the first month, first 6 weeks, first 8 weeks, and then they just drop off the face of the planet. I'm also familiar with the person who comes into class and they're diligent about coming into class, but when they're in class, they're not diligent about their drilling. They're not diligent about listening to the instructor and following the technique and drilling the technique over and over and over again so that they can get comfortable with it. Okay? I do believe that sparring is the best way to get better. That being said, drilling has its place because that's what's going to help you keep the right mindset through your jiu-jitsu journey. And I know it doesn't seem like that at first, but it does lend a sense of linear understanding so that you feel like you're progressing. Okay? So you want to be diligent while in class. Next, while you're being diligent in the class, you don't want to just pay attention to the details of the techniques that are being shown, but you also want to try and understand the concepts. Try to find common themes between techniques. Try to see, like, oh, well, when they did this sweep or that sweep, they, angled off this way and they seem to do this. And it seems like every time we do sweeps, we're doing this, right? And don't be afraid to ask those questions. Next, when it comes to your training, focus on survival and escape, and in that order. Okay? So when you're rolling with these blue belts, purple belts, brown belts that are much bigger or much more skilled, and they can give you a hard time and they can smash you, you want to focus on, being able to survive, to be in their world and be able to survive. And once you feel like, okay, I can survive a round, or I can survive 3, 4, 5 minutes, okay, now I'm going to make an actual honest effort, not recklessly, of course, but I'm going to make an honest effort using my technique to escape from their control and somehow at least get back to 50-50 position, whether that be the literal 50-50 guard, or be that be both on our feet, or we're both on our knees, or we're scrambling, or something like that, right? So those are the two things you really want to focus on, and those techniques that lead into those things, those are the fundamentals, those are the foundational techniques, right? Is that the techniques that help you survive and that help you escape. Okay? Yeah. All the other stuff, okay, that's stuff that I don't want to say that it's advanced. Okay, there are definitely sweeps and submissions that you could consider fundamentals. That being said, the foundation of being able to get to a place where you can sweep or you can submit is directly impacted on your ability to survive first and escape a bad situation. Okay? It'll make you much more confident, and it will help your um, randomized learning or your sparring, right? Much, much more if you feel confident that you can survive and escape. And then you're outside of class, okay? Focus on movement drills, okay? Those are the foundations of everything that you will do. I know you probably think, oh, I'm an athlete, I'm this, I'm that. Or you maybe think it's a waste of time. How is it going to help me? But honestly, the number one thing you can do to help you progress and understand the jujitsu is become more self aware of your body. So that when the professor is talking to you and telling you, move your hips, thrust your hips, pick up your hips, get your base, move your knee this way, put your shin here, circle your foot, flex your foot, all these little tiny things, plant your foot. These are things I know they seem like they don't need explanation or they don't need practice, but if you really thought about it, that's really your ego getting in your way, right? How many kids go out and they practice nothing at all, but they can hit, 10 for 10 free throws? I mean, if you think about describing a free throw, it's pretty simple, right? It's a pretty simple thing to describe. You stand at the free throw line, you pick the ball up, and you throw it at the basket. What else is there? Well, to the layman, there's absolutely nothing else to it, right? They're throwing the ball to fall into the basket. That's it. Now, to the basketball coach, the basketball fundamentalist, they're like, oh, no, no, no. There are so many parts and mechanics to shooting the ball properly, right? Well, a very, very similar thing in jiu-jitsu. Next, your resources. Okay, you want to have some resources. The number one resource that you can get is to find a colored belt to adopt you, right? A blue belt, a purple belt, a brown belt, somebody that you connect with, somebody that it's easy for you to communicate with, and you want to basically be their Padawan, right? Next, watch the proper videos. Again, I can't tell you how many people I've seen come in, and it's mostly young, athletic guys, the teenage up to like 28 or so, that go onto YouTube and they watch the latest and greatest Berimbolo, De La Hiva, Danaher Death Squad, Ashigarami setup, whatever the case may be. And then that's the thing that they want to try, even though they can't hold somebody in their closed guard yet. They can't even hold the blue belt that they're sparring with in their closed guard, but they want to try all this other stuff. Don't do that. Don't do it. It's just not smart for you to make your blue belt quickly. Watch the proper videos. You can YouTube fundamentals of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and there's a ton of resources. You can buy Gracie combatives. I think there's holes in that system. I've done a review for it. I think that there's holes for a blue belt, in my personal opinion. However, that being said, it is still really good foundational fundamental material. The Hicks and Gracie self-defense unit, I just did a commentary on that, just did a review on that. Outstanding, very fundamental, very effective techniques in those videos. Old School Fundamentals by Chris Howder. Again, very, very good DVD, video, whatever you want to call it, with awesome and outstanding fundamentals. I have yet to review the Danaher fundamentals, but from what I've seen, the material there is pretty darn good. Okay? I've only seen the tidbits that, they let out on YouTube, and just from that, I'm like, wow, I'm really interested. So stay tuned. I'm going to get that and I'm going to watch it. And again, I'll give you my feedback on it. And right now, I think it looks like a really good system. So if you're going to have video resources, make sure that you're looking at the right video resources. And then lastly, best book I have come across. I really believe that everybody who starts jiu-jitsu should get this book, okay? Because I really like the way that Professor, I think he's still a professor. I don't know if he's been promoted past that. If so, my apologies. No disrespect intended. Saulo Ribeiro, the way that he articulates things, the way that he makes it very okay for you to focus on survival and escapes at white belt and even blue belt is outstanding. And as a resource, it's just so awesome because it talks about not just what to do and what's the right escape, but he talks about why you might want to not try other types of escapes. Or at least if you like those escapes, understand what the risks are when you use those type of escapes or those type of survival tactics, right? So that you understand that what the give and take is in the technique that you're using. So all in all, there is one last piece, right? There's one last piece to making your blue belt fast, and that's enjoy your time at white belt. I mean that. It really is like your jujitsu childhood. When you look back, when you're a blue belt or a purple belt and you look back, you're going to be amazed that you were ever a white belt. Like, you're going to feel like that time just absolutely flew by, and you're gonna go like, wow, I wish there had been some other things I would have done. I wish I'd have competed. Man, I could have waited another 3 months. I could have waited another, 6 months for my blue belt. I could have waited a year, for my blue belt. Man, that was so fun. It was so fun being a white belt, right? When all of my excuses were basically I'm a white belt and I don't know what I'm doing, right? It's amazing. And so really cherish the time that you're at white belt, and it will make it seem like your blue belt came like that. Okay, guys. So let's move on. There's some other things I want to get to. We're going to talk about next. Um, so what I want to get into right now, I kind of talked a little bit about it in the last episode, and that's I want to get a little bit into the Khabib and Tony fight. Now, the reason why I want to get into this fight really early on is the fact that I can see so many dynamics into this fight. I actually think that this is one of the most interesting fights that the UFC has put on in a very long time. It's probably the most interesting fight since I would say probably the DC John Jones rematch, maybe even the Khabib versus Connor, fight. It's on par with those guys. Like, it's up there as far as very intriguing and really who's going to dominate the fight. So first and foremost, let me say that I'm going to be completely upfront and honest. I'm more of a Tony fan than a Khabib fan, so I will be rooting for Tony to win the fight. So that may skew some of my analysis and some of my opinions on the fight. But that being said, I still want to look at the fight and be as objective as I possibly can and look at ways that, Khabib could win the fight, look at ways that Tony could win the fight, and go from there. So, first and foremost, one of the scenarios that I think I have a unique perspective on, one of the scenarios I could see playing out, which I don't think a lot of people have talked about, is I could see a scenario in which Tony loses the fight but wins the fight. And what I mean by that is that he would lose the fight on the scorecard, but in the court of public opinion, people will say that he won the fight because he did more damage to Khabib. So if you watch a lot of Tony's fights, you'll notice that when he's getting taken down, he doesn't necessarily fight off takedowns. He allows himself to be taken down. He especially doesn't seem to mind to get taken down if you're in the middle of the cage. So what Khabib tends to do is, and I don't want to get too deep into this because this goes into how he can win the fight, but what Khabib tends to do is get his opponent backed up really close against the cage. Usually what he does is he'll shoot maybe from far where he's like in the middle of the octagon. It's a very lazy shot. It's really not that textbook for a wrestling, from a wrestling perspective. You're talking pure collegiate or Olympic style wrestling. But what it does is it accomplishes him closing the gap, getting to the other fighter, and then he basically continues to push until he gets him up against the cage, and then he takes him down using the cage as basically limiting their escape avenues. And since Tony is okay with being taken down in the middle of the cage, I could see a place in this fight or I could see this playing out in the fight where Khabib shoots one of those takedowns. Tony doesn't really fight the takedown, allows himself to get taken down so that he can go to his closed guard and immediately work up into a rubber guard type situation. And if you've seen Tony's closed guard and his rubber guard, you know that he loves to attack with strikes from that position. He doesn't just throw up submissions. He doesn't just, oh, I have you in the closed guard, so now I'm going to try a triangle. Now I'm going to try, this or that. He doesn't play jiu-jitsu the way that a lot of high-level jiu-jitsu players do once they hit the closed guard and look for sweeps and look for things of that nature. Before he does any of those things, Tony likes to soften up his opponent with a lot of strikes, elbow strikes in particular. And so I could see a scenario very similar to what we saw GSP go through against Big Rig, where Tony does much more damage in the rounds that he wins, cuts Khabib open. Khabib could look much uglier at the end of the fight than Tony, look much more worse for the wear than Tony, but yet still Khabib win the fight based on the fact that he won more rounds, right? Or that maybe by the judge's opinion he controlled more of that round even though he got cut up in it. And therein lies one of the problems, of course, with UFC scoring, is that these judges, many of them are ignorant of, fighting. They may know the rule set, right? And they may have worked their way up. Some of them, it doesn't seem like it because they're absolutely horrible judges. But, they may understand the rule set of fighting and, how to score the fight, but understanding what's actually happening in the fight, i.e., for instance, who's doing the most damage, who's actually controlling the fight, right? Who's actually dictating the pace. Those things come from actually participating, practicing, and training as a fighter, right? And doing analysis. Those things, that's where that comes from. And a lot of these judges just, it doesn't seem like they do that. I don't think they understand that you can control the fight from a bottom position. I don't think that they can understand that you can control a fight and the pace of a fight and the distance of a fight by backing up. I just don't think a lot of judges fully comprehend that, even at the highest level. And that's why we see some of these weird scorecards sometimes where we're like, what fight were they watching? Like, just because somebody's throwing their face into somebody's punch doesn't mean that they're controlling, quote unquote, controlling the fight. So that's the number one thing that I really wanted to get out there before we even see this fight, because I could see that happening and there being a big push for a rematch. And should Conor win his fight, or should Gaethje go on to win another fight, I could see both of those guys really pushing to get the fight against Khabib, and the UFC maybe even wanting to make those fights, but the public clamoring for a rematch with Tony. Now, here's the thing. This is exactly the reason why I think I'm not even going to try and say his last name and butcher it, but I'll just say his first name, Ali, Khabib's manager. This is exactly why I think he's drug his feet in making the Tony Ferguson fight. I think that he's done everything that he can for as long as he can. Once Khabib got the belt, once Khabib was going to start contending for the belt, to try not to make this fight, to try to make sure that everything that possibly could be in Khabib's favor for the fight was in Khabib's favor, because he's a really good manager. Like, I don't like the guy personally. I think he's bad for MMA as a sport. Personally, I think he does some really shitty things as a human being. Talking smack to fighters when he's not a fighter and he's not going to get in the octagon with them. He's been involved in already a couple of physical type altercation with fighters that happen to be rivals of his fighters, and things of that nature. And UFC just is reluctant to do anything to him. They really should hold him accountable, because being that he's a manager, he should be the person, squashing those things and keeping it calm and keeping it business, so that, it looks better for the UFC instead of making the UFC look like a bunch of thugs. But that all being said, what I can say about Ali, the reason why I give him a lot of props and a lot of respect, is that as far as a manager, he does absolutely the right thing by his fighters all the time. Now, that's just my opinion. That's just my opinion on the guy. So, but I think this is exactly why he doesn't want, he didn't want Tony to fight Khabib, because if you notice, Khabib also isn't in the business of doing rematches, okay? And a lot of people will say, well, this person and that person, nobody's beat him, so why would you do a rematch? Well, because he still had close fights. He still had entertaining fights. There's still fights that you may want to see a rematch, because, beating somebody one time when they have no idea what to prepare for, when they don't really understand what to expect. I mean, they watch tape, but anybody who has done any kind of combat sports realizes that it's two different things. One, to watch somebody roll, or watch somebody box, or watch somebody fight, and then for you to be the other person in there and be their opponent. You might be able to see all kinds of things from the outside looking in. It's a different thing when you're in the mess, when you're in the fray, when you're in the fire yourself, right? To be able to react to those things. And so while these fighters may have had game plans that, they thought would work, once they got in there, they realized, oh, my eyes kind of deceived me. I thought I was seeing this one thing on tape, but that's not working. And, maybe the second time around, their adjustments make a difference, right? So I don't think Khabib's in the business of giving a rematch. So even though Khabib may get, quote unquote, beat up by Tony, but yet win the fight on the judges' scorecards, and the public is clamoring for a rematch, I don't think Ali is going to allow that to happen very easily. I think if for instance, Conor wins against Cowboy, I know that's coming up soon, so I don't know if this will be out by then. It should be. But if Conor beats Cowboy and then maybe has another fight at 155, maybe some kind of tune-up type fight at 155, maybe somebody who's, a top 10 fighter, but everybody's pretty confident he can beat, well, then I think Ali, and, as the management kind of changes his tune on fighting Conor for a second time, because there's more money, there's going to be more money to be made to fight Conor in a rematch, and any possible, game changes that change the outcome of the game, than fighting Tony in a rematch. Like, I love Tony Ferguson. He's one of my favorite fighters. I even like him more, as a fan. I like him even more than Conor. But if we're going to be honest and we're going to be objective about who brings in the ticket sales, should Conor win against Cowboy, he still has the bigger brand. He still has the more marketable brand. And that is what it is, unfortunately. It just is. That's the business side of the sport. And so I really think that that's something that, people have to start taking a look at. What's going to happen if Tony is able to cut up Khabib in this fight, make his face look like hamburger meat, but Khabib's still able to get these takedowns and quote unquote hold Tony down and quote unquote ground and pound him. But if he looks worse for the wear and wins on the judges' scorecards, how are we going to feel about that as, the public at large, as the UFC fan base? I think that's super interesting, guys. I think there's a lot of things that could go on in this fight, and we're going to talk a little bit more in future episodes, in the next couple of weeks, about how Tony can win this fight and how Khabib could win this fight. Clearly, I believe that one of the ways that Tony possibly could win this fight is by decision if you have the right judges in there and the scenario I just talked about plays out. And the right judges are there and they see that, yes, even though Khabib was on top of the fight, Tony inflicted more damage, i.e. he won the fight, the fist fight, the contest of doing damage to the other guy, then he could win that way. And again, you might see a big push for a rematch there, which, has its implications for the entire weight division, because if Tony were to beat Khabib and beat him in that fashion, then similarly to Khabib being put in an awkward position, that puts Conor in an awkward position if he wants another shot at Khabib at 155, because clearly in that point, Khabib and his management team is going to want a rematch, an immediate rematch against Tony, and they're going to claim that, hey, look, I took this guy down, I held him down, I ground and pounded him, he got a couple of lucky slices that they didn't even hurt, his elbows are just sharp, and, these judges didn't know what they were seeing, and blah, 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 right? So that has implications as well. So we're going to keep talking about this as the weeks go by up until the fight. So let's move on, guys. Next thing I want to talk about when it comes to the UFC and upcoming events. By the way, guys, I'm recording this while I'm driving because I got to start making better use of my time. And so I'm sorry for any of the background noise that you may hear. Let's talk a little bit about the Dominic Reyes versus John Jones fight. I think this is a much more interesting fight than a lot of the casuals seem to think it is. Dominic Reyes is a very, very good athlete. I mean, he is a top level athlete, and a lot of people say things like that when they're talking about fighters, and these fighters are really good athletes. However, Dominic Reyes is the second wave of a more traditional, i.e. baseball, basketball, football, athlete, right? That has transitioned from one of those more traditional sports, right, or traditional lineages into fights, right? We saw some of this probably early in the 10s, right, 2010-ish. We saw some Matt Mitrione, I believe, Brendan Schaub, these guys. There was a couple other guys, I can't think of their names off the top of my head, but they made those transitions from at one time being high-level football players. Of course, you had Michael Westbrook even before those guys, right? So you have this is like the second or third generation of these more top-level athletes from other sports who are making this transition into MMA. Now, why is it important? Because your overall athleticism to play basketball and football in particular has to be much, much higher than to be a fighter, especially if we're talking lighter weight boxing, lighter weight grappling, because those particular sports are so dominated by technique. I would even say that wrestling, right, the more collegiate or high school style wrestling is much more dominated by technique than it is by athleticism. In football and in basketball, hard work definitely pays off. It definitely plays a part. That being said, if you have two guys of equal, work ethic, generally speaking, the more talented person, right, the person that is biologically has more, or as a child was given, better tools, right, to develop, is the person who's going to come out on top. And so just in its essence, of the depth of talent, right? Let's just be honest, there are a lot more kids playing basketball and football than there are grappling and boxing and wrestling, right? There's just is a lot more kids doing those other sports. Well, that means that depth, the talent pool is much, much deeper, which means you have to be an even better athlete. You have to be in a higher percentile in order to make it, onto the high school team, onto the college team, onto the NFL teams, right? You have to be a higher level athlete. So this is the third generation, right? Dominic Reyes is the third generation of one of these more traditional athletes that is crossing over and becoming an MMA fighter. I personally think that he's being underestimated by most of the public. I don't think that Jon Jones is making the mistake of underestimating him. I don't. But I do believe that a lot of the public is. Now, one of the things that worries me is hearing Jon Jones talk some of his smack, because he hasn't been known to be a guy that holds a quote-unquote poker face, right? He doesn't hold a poker face. He'll kind of tell you what he thinks of you for real, and that's all there is to it. Like, for instance, when he talked about Daniel Cormier, and they were talking about their rematch, and he told Daniel, like, oh, we saw some stuff on tape on you. We saw some stuff on tape on you. Oh, yeah. And Daniel said, oh, they're dropping my hands. Well, I know about that, too, and I've been working on that already. And so, in essence, Jon Jones told Daniel what he was going to do in that rematch. I'm going to kick you in the damn head. And it's going to be that right kick to the left side of your dome, because you reach down to block kicks. And so I'm going to condition. I mean, essentially, he gave Daniel Cormier the game plan, right? And when he talks about other fighters, while he may respect them, he doesn't have a big poker face, right? And so because of that, it's worried me that Jon Jones, for Jon Jones, not me personally, because I'm not a Jon Jones fan, but for the competitive nature of the fight, it worries me that maybe Jon is subconsciously, not taking Reyes as serious as he should, or that he's possibly taking him lighter than he should. He's underestimating the tools in Reyes' toolbox because of the fact that, he says about Reyes, he basically told him, oh, what you have is a left hand. What you have is your left hand. Yep, and a straight left. Yep, and a straight left. So pretty much as long as I, don't allow you to hit me with that straight left, I'm good. Now, yes, maybe he's doing the psychological, I'm going to bait you, blah, blah, blah thing. And maybe this is a new tool in Jon Jones' toolbox. But I'm just going on what the record shows of Jon Jones. He's not that guy. He actually believes in himself enough and believes in his skills enough. Now, some people may call that confidence. Some people might call that arrogance. Whatever you call it, he believes in himself enough that he believes that he doesn't have to trick you into thinking one thing to do another thing. He's just going to do what he does, and he's going to do it better than what you do, and he's going to beat you. That's what Jon Jones' mentality is. Now, Reyes, I think, has more tools in his toolbox than that left hand. And the thing is that he's very judicious with it, right? We see some guys, let's say for instance, like, I hate to pick on Conor, but let's go to Conor. Yeah, he has that knockout power in his left hand. But sometimes, like we saw against, Nate Diaz, he gets a little bit greedy with it, right? He lands it, bam, lands it again, lands it, and all of a sudden now he's looking for essentially that one-punch KO. Where had he been more judicious with it, landed it, saw, oh, this guy can take a pretty good hit, so I'm going to take a little bit off of this one so that I can land 2 or 3 after it. So I'm going to land my left and come, back with another, with a straight right or a right hook, and then another left, or, I can go left, right, left, or I can go left, right, left, or left and left, right, or whatever he wants to do. If I don't overextend and I take just a tiny bit of power off of it, I can land 4 or 5 punches for what it would have cost me to get one. He got greedy with his punches, right? He got greedy with them. Like, he got greedy with the power. He knows he has his knockout power, so he got greedy about it. I've never seen that out of Reyes, okay? I've never seen Reyes get greedy because he has power. He's judicious with his shots. He's not throwing in a manner that's going to gas him. So I think that Jon Jones thinks that he's going to outlast Reyes. I think he thinks he's going to use his pretty typical defense, which is to, post and push that, basically stiff arm, right, with one hand and kind of cover up with the other hand. And that's usually where he flays his, splays his fingers out and gets eye pokes, right? He thinks he's going to use that particular defense. And I don't think that defense is going to be there. And I don't think it's going to be there for a number of reasons. I think, number one, Reyes is going to play up the eye poke. I'm not saying that Reyes is going to be a chump, but what I'm saying is that I think that Reyes is going to talk to the ref about it. He is, going to talk to the ref, have a good discussion with the ref about it prior to the fight. I think that when Jon Jones does it, he's going to point it out to the ref in the fight. And I think if the finger even looks close to his eye, if it touches anywhere near his eye, I mean, it could touch, on the tip of his nose. It could touch the bridge of his nose. It could touch his eyebrow, okay? I think Reyes is going to try and get an eye poke call and really play it up, because that is, it really is an effective way to keep somebody in a sporting competition. It is a good way to keep somebody off of you, because they know that if they just keep fighting and their, vision is blurred, they're going to get knocked out. And so if you keep pushing those fingers towards the eyes, after a while, they kind of get a little bit, reluctant to want to come in on you, right? They get a little reluctant. And so what Jon likes to do is throw one or two, either a punch kick or a kick punch, sometimes just a single kick or a single punch, then disengage, then a single and disengage, right? And when he disengages, if you come forward, he likes to do that stiff arm, that post. I like to call it a post. He likes to do that post and cover as he circles away. Khabib does it as well. Both of them do it. It's pretty nasty, actually. But anyhow, I mean, this is what goes on, right? And so I think that Reyes is going to really play that up. And I feel like Reyes can get the knockout. The one thing that I haven't seen a lot of people do, and you started to see it in the last fight Jon Jones had, right? Where right before he, I believe it was Santos, wasn't it? Thiago Santos. Right before he hurt his knee, he started to put combinations together. And so he was moving in a way to where he could avoid that post, and then instead of just throwing one punch, which a lot of people do as they come after Jon, they throw a single punch, and because he does that little post and splaying, right, they kind of back off and look for another way to go around. Santos was moving in a way where he almost treated that post like it was a jab or a straight. And so he would come in with his strike, and as the post would come, he would slip to one side or the other and then continue coming forward. When he did that, Jon Jones did something that is very dangerous to do, especially against a big striker, right, that is 100% mobile and 100% healthy, which Reyes should be, and hopefully he doesn't, hurt himself in the fight. And that's, he turned his back to exit away so that he could exit faster, because then of course he's moving in the direction that he's facing. But as he did it, he'd also tuck his head down, which is really bad because you're setting yourself to get either uppercutted or kicked in the head. As you duck and move away, you put yourself right into the kicking distance. I think had, Santos not had that injury to his knee, I feel he would have even given bigger problems to Jon Jones. But that's just my opinion. That's what I saw in the fight. I really saw that Jon Jones, as far as winning the fight on the scorecards, was bailed out a little bit by the fact that his opponent got an injury mid-fight. I think had Santos been able to be more aggressive and more explosive and athletic like he usually fights, I think that would have created a problem. The other thing we also know is that when Jon Jones has had problems against opponents, it's against opponents that are good boxers, okay? They have good boxing at boxing distance, and that are at least as tall as him. The only fighter that was shorter than Jon Jones, which gave him issues, was DC, right? DC gave him issues in that rematch right up until the head kick anyway, and those created problems, right? But what is DC known for? He's known for his wrestling and really good inside boxing, okay? He's got really good boxing. When Gustafsson gave Jon Jones problems, Gustafsson was winning, or I guess giving Jones problems in their first fight when they were in the boxing exchanges. And so I really feel like those are the areas that Reyes is going to look to exploit. Now, when we get a little bit closer to the fight card, we'll try to put something together. Also, I need to start getting back on the UFC so we can start talking about some of the jiu-jitsu tournaments, some of the quintets and stuff have been going on, so we'll have a good time with that. But that's what I got for upcoming fights that are super interesting to me, and let's go ahead and move on, guys. Okay, guys, so apologies for some of the shaky video there. It's a brand new stand I'm trying out in the car so that I can do the segments as I explained before, so maybe it's something you just want to listen to rather than watch. But anyhow, let's go ahead and move on. So since I recorded that segment, the Conor McGregor Cowboy Cerrone fight has happened, and as we all know by now, Conor knocked out Cowboy in about 40 seconds. I can't say that I'm surprised. It actually is the outcome I was expecting. Conor's a beast, and I think that people continuously doubt Conor, and I don't think they quite understand his understanding of combat, So anyhow, with all of that, this does throw an interesting, flavor, an interesting set of lenses onto the upcoming bout with Khabib and Tony. As we come closer to that fight, I'm sure Conor's going to try and stay in shape. I'm sure he's going to be within striking distance of making 155. I'm sure he'd be willing to step in on a moment's notice, regardless of who wins the fight. And that's pretty exciting for fight fans. Now, the only problem with that is that he's been talking about fighting in March, and I believe that the Khabib-Tony fight is in April, so he might have to put that on the back burner. He probably wants to ask for a fight sometime or maybe on the undercard of that fight or closer to that fight. Maybe a lot of times they'll do like a weekend before ESPN type card, right? Maybe he wants to get on that card so it's a little bit closer at 155, and then that way if somebody pulls out, you'll usually know about that at least within a week. So I think that's what he'll do. Now, as I talked about in my breakdown with Khabib and Tony, it's really interesting because I know a lot of people are saying, hey, what is the biggest fight to make for Conor? And they're going back and forth, and how does UFC this and this and this? Well, it's really, arrogant of us as fans and of the media, especially the MMA media, where again, they want always the athlete to be selfless and be like, well, what's in the best interest of the UFC and the fans? Well, at some point, you have to realize, people, that these guys are fighting for themselves. They're fighting for their family. They're fighting to make forever money for their families. So, you have to think about what's the most money that they can make, and that has to play into it. So, yes, the Masvidal fight looks good, but yes, so does a title shot. Title shot probably generates about the same amount of money as a fight with Masvidal. But I think the Masvidal fight would be very unique in the sense that it's one of the few fights that would be a non-title fight that could carry a card. I really believe that. Now, herein kind of lies the problem. Is right now, because within MMA, we really, really, as fans and even at the MMA media, really suffer from recency bias worse than probably any set of fan group. Okay. And so, right now, in this very snapshot in time, Connor is the hot commodity. But let's say what I just described earlier in the show transpires, and Tony beats up Khabib but loses the fight. You're telling me the hot commodity, that there will not be, fans just beating the drums for a rematch? And then where does that leave Connor? So a lot of times people, although they like to, especially in the media starts selling you these narratives and yada yada yada. The problem is that because we suffer from recency bias so badly as MMA and fight fans in general, because I think boxing fans do it too. Since we suffer from that so bad, we tend to like jump on this narrative, and we don't really understand that, wow, even a close fight, let's say it's a super competitive, maybe it's a split decision, maybe, all of these things, that changes everything. It changes who is the hot commodity and what's the next money fight to make. So, that's something to think about. Now, as far as Connor goes, I mean, he did say that Gaethje was on his radar. He did talk about Usman, and he did talk, about Masvidal. My personal opinion is that if he can make 155 still, which he should, because he made 170 relatively easy. If you looked at his body, it looked like he wasn't drained even at the weigh-in. He didn't look drained. He didn't look thin. It didn't even look like he made much of a weight cut, to be honest. So I think he could make 155. I think that's the next fight for him to make if he's looking to reestablish his legacy. Now, in my opinion, I think he beats Gaethje. Like, I know Gaethje is hot right now. I know Gaethje looks great right now. But even before this fight, I thought that, yeah, I understand why Gaethje wants to fight him, because everybody wants the red panty night. But, the reality is that I just think that Gaethje, his lack of wanting to diversify his fight game within the fight, i.e., use his wrestling, okay, his utter, just hard-headedness. I mean, I hate to say it because I love the guy. He's one of my favorite fighters to watch, but he just is so stubborn and will not use his wrestling. And if he's going to get into a boxing match with Connor, I'm sorry. I just think that Connor's boxing is better. I think that Connor's overall striking is better. I think that Connor overall is a smarter fighter in the sense that he will adapt and do what he needs to do to win the fight. I don't feel like Gaethje does that. I feel like Gaethje wants to win a certain way. He wants to put on a certain show, and because of that, he's going to do what he does, and consequences be damned. And while that's a very entertaining fight, it doesn't always make for the best competitive fight. So, that's just my opinion on that. But I think that maybe you schedule Conor Gaethje maybe a week before or a week after, the Tony Khabib fight, just in case one of them pulls out, and then that way, Conor can step right in and take on one of them guys for the title. Now, if I'm being honest, I don't think he beats Tony. As far as Khabib, I don't know if what he's saying is true and he really was off his game. Maybe it's a different fight. Stylistically, I think Tony's a bad matchup for him. I just just the same way I think Nate is a bad matchup for him. I think that stylistically, Tony is a bad matchup for him. But that's just my opinion. So anyhow, guys, we'll get more into that. Also, if you didn't know, kind of flew under the radar because of the Conor fight coming up. A lot of people who are into fighting and into grappling, you may not have, it kind of went under the radar. But, the King got beat by Vinny Malgalese, who, it was on point. I haven't actually watched the match myself. I've just watched the highlights. What it looks like to me is that Vinny fought a very similar fight to what Rockhold fought against Rodriguez in Polaris a few weeks ago, where he fought not to lose and he was very defensive. And again, it's a very boring style, but if you're just trying to get a W for the sake of getting a W, I mean, I guess. I don't feel like, he ever actually threatened to get a submission or anything like that, but, it is what it is. So, anyhow, guys, we'll catch you on the rebound. Remember, be practical, be purposeful, get fit with a purpose, guys.